The planet-cracking beam from the Xylock's heavy cruiser descended like a spear of absolute light, meant to turn Selim Prime to ash. It never reached the surface. Elias Thorne hung suspended in the burning exosphere, arms wide, catching the apocalyptic energy barehanded while his skin drank the fire. What happens when the galaxy's weakest species decides they are tired of running, and the monsters finally catch up? The soil caked beneath his fingernails had still been damp with nutrient broth then, for months before the sky burned. He was simply a refugee kneeling beside a bed of dormant void lilies. Leora Valtiz was only in her second cycle as an intake clerk. The luminescent nodes along her collarbone still flushed with the pale, anxious yellow of a trainee whenever a new transport arrived. This one held Terran colonists from Aegis 7, survivors of a Xylock's horde border raid. According to her academy texts, human bioelectric auras were supposed to be chaotic. The empathic organs of her people, the lumina, read the microfluctuations in ambient heat and electromagnetic fields generated by alien nervous systems, translating them into emotional resonance. The Draxi registered as a heavy, thudding rhythm. The Terrans felt like static. Humans were supposed to feel loud. Instead, as Leora walked among the 43 refugees with her flickering data stylus, she felt only a dense, suffocating quiet. They did not weep. They simply stared at the glowing crystal architecture of the intake bay. Then she reached Elias. He stood apart from the others. He carried no belongings. When Leora cast her empathic net toward him, she did not feel the usual spikes of grief or terror. Nothing. It was not the emptiness of a dead thing. It was a terrifying, deliberate stillness, which meant he was either entirely devoid of emotion or... "Name?" she asked, her voice faltering. "Elias Thorne," he said. His eyes mapped the structural weak points of the ceiling before returning to her face. "Agricultural engineer." Leora assigned him to the lower botanical sanctuaries. It was an isolated posting, far from the crowded upper tiers, a place where the air always smelled of wet earth and ozone. She found herself visiting the underground gardens during her rest cycles. She told herself she was monitoring a displaced asset. Truth is, the quiet around him was gravity. She wanted to know what pulled so hard. She watched him coax the delicate void lilies into bloom. His hands were mapped with pale, overlapping scars. Agricultural engineers did not have knuckles that looked like shattered porcelain. A sharp crack. Leora had just stepped off the transit lift when the sound echoed through the sanctuary. She sprinted down the winding crystal path. 3 Xylock's infiltrators, massive insectoid warriors clad in segmented armor, lay sprawled across the mossy floor. Their heavy plasma rifles were still slung across their backs. Elias was standing 10 paces away. He was carefully pruning a bioluminescent fern. "Are you injured?" Leora asked, her nodes flashing a frantic crimson. "I heard a thud," Elias replied softly. "I think they tripped." Leora stared at the 3 armored warriors. Each was bred for slaughter, carrying enough firepower to level a city block. They had not tripped. Their thoracic plates were dented inward at exact critical nerve junctions. Precision strike. She looked back at Elias. The mundane hum of the environmental recyclers filled the silence between them. He did not sweat. His pulse, which she could barely read beneath his unnatural stillness, had not elevated by a single beat. The invasion did not begin with a formal declaration. It began with the sky shattering. Leora stood on the high balconies of the central command spire alongside her brother, Kalen. A half-empty cup of roasted chicory root slipped from her fingers, shattering against the crystalline floor. The mundane spill was instantly forgotten. Above them, the Xylock's horde dropped out of slipspace. 300 warships eclipsed the twin suns, casting long, jagged shadows across the glowing city. Kalen's bioluminescence flared a violent, panicked purple. He barked frantic orders into his comms unit, demanding the Lumina home fleet form a defensive perimeter. If the orbital tethers held, they didn't. The Lumina fleet burned within minutes. Debris rained down like falling stars, carving molten craters into the capital's pristine architecture. Millions of lumina crowded the crystalline balconies and shattered walkways, their collective empathic nodes flashing in a blinding, synchronized wave of absolute terror as the obsidian maw, a Xylock's dreadnought the size of a tectonic plate, descended to finish the job. Kalen ordered a total evacuation to the deep bunkers. Leora refused to move. She gripped the balcony railing, her eyes fixed on the lower tiers. Then, the planetary empathic network flooded with something impossible. Not fear, not anger, force. Raw, kinetic gravity surging from the lower botanical sanctuaries. Leora looked down. Elias walked out of the main garden gates. He wore his soil-stained coveralls. He carried no weapon. He did not run. He simply bent his knees, and the bedrock splintered. He launched upward. The sonic boom shattered every window in the district. He ascended like a reverse meteor, a solitary human rising to meet an armada, trailing a wake of displaced gravity that made the air scream. And now, floating in the thermosphere above a burning world, bathed in the blinding light of the dreadnought's weapon, he simply closed his hands. The apocalyptic energy did not consume him, fed him. From the surface, Leora watched through her macroviewers as the tiny human silhouette compressed the ambient radiation of a dying star into his chest. His flesh did not melt. The project that created him, Project Zenith, had not built a soldier. They had built a kinetic sink. He released the absorbed energy in a single focus pulse. The obsidian maw did not explode. It evaporated. The redirected force struck the dreadnought's armored prow and sheared through 3 miles of reinforced alloy, reducing the flagship to its component atoms in a blinding white flash that cast a third, terrible shadow across the capital. He did not stop. Elias hit the remaining Xylock's fleet at near-relativistic speed. He became a localized extinction event. He tore through heavy cruisers, his unbreakable bones snapping keels in half, using their own point-blank weapons fire to fuel his relentless momentum. Leora's empathic senses stretched toward orbit, catching the terrifying truth beneath the carnage. He felt every single life he extinguished. He hated it, but he refused to let Selim Prime burn. 17 minutes. That was all it took for humanity's hidden dreadnought to reduce 300 warships to drifting, silent slag. He returned to the sanctuary hours later, his skin scarred with carbon that was already healing. The delicate void lilies had been crushed by the shockwave of his departure. Leora watched from the doorway as the weapon that had just broken an armada knelt in the dirt, his indestructible hands trembling as he gently packed fresh soil around the broken roots. Do you think the galaxy will ever look at a human gardener the same way again? We'll be here tomorrow with another story from the deep black. So come back and find out what else is hiding in the dirt.